So what I'm going to do is very quickly touch over some of these high points. We're going to walk through the licensing pages as they are today, and we know in like an hour they will change and they will change again. So let's just appreciate the dynamic nature of said licensing. Um, the more we understand the core concepts of the how and the why Microsoft, I think, is making these licensing decisions, the easier it is for me to remember them. And I'm sure it'll be easier for you and the easier for you to also communicate them to your organization as you think of distribution models or how you want to set up your workspaces or certain solutions. And, I have worked across a pretty wide spectrum of, whether it's a SaaS company or services company or, a very industry specific company. Everybody uses Power BI so differently, has such different needs of how they want to buy it and how they want to distribute that content, how they want to collaborate either within their organization, across a family of organizations, or even externally with partners alike. Okay, so this is my blog that is Power BI centric with its licensing and Fabric. And soon I will be releasing another one just specifically about Fabric. Now, why do I mention that? Fabric and Power BI, what is the relationship? Fabric is the umbrella term of the end-to-end capabilities within Microsoft's data and AI stack. And Power BI is a component of that. But Power BI really is a large component of it because it becomes the connective tissue. And when you think of, application development, it really is that front end for all the data and analytics. We're seeing more of this graphical interface for exploring and working with your data also in Fabric. But what Power BI's strength is being the translator and insights for the business. So just kind of scrolling through from a bird's eye view, this is one of the core concepts of sharing in Power BI. Now, Power BI, we're going to talk about a Power BI free license and this concept of workspaces. Workspaces are a core component of this container that becomes where you develop and where you publish apps and where that collaboration can occur, whether it's with your coworker, whether it's a collaborator externally through a B2B connection, or it's just you. And that's the My Workspace. When you think of My Workspace, that's where the Power BI free really comes in. And whenever you're building something, it's just for yourself. But so this term workspace, right? Very important. Now, when you're using just traditional workspaces and you spin up a workspace, that's where you see it's a shared space where people can publish to. That sharing, that collaboration, that's really where a Power BI license comes to bear. And that is when you need to buy, at the minimum, a Power BI Pro license with some caveats for premium, which we'll get into. But whoever is publishing content will always need a Power BI Pro license. You can't get away from it, unfortunately. Is that all making sense for everybody? I'm sure this is kind of review for some of the people on the call. Okay. Now we also have this concept of an app. Think of the app as more of a production environment. In this example that we have, think of it like the magazine on the newsstand versus the editor's desk that's working on, okay, hey, here's the article we're going to have, the picture, here is the content we're going to put together. A lot of this needs to happen in the behind the curtains. So then I, as the reader, I only get to see a finished product. And I only see a finished product every month because that's updated. The article's updated, content's updated. I don't see how the sausage is made, right? Now you have that option of just being able to publish exactly what you want from this workspace, whether it's a certain report, access to a data set, a dashboard, data flows. there's a lot that happens within this workspace that um, you can choose whether it's on or off that can finally make its way to the app and onto uh, the eyeballs of the business to see. So now that we understand the components of the workspace, you know, how an app differs only for the consumers. Next I get into, what is Power BI, the free license. Now, when you have premium capacity, that's where the free license really comes in, is where you have people that only want to look at reports and you've purchased premium capacity. The only other reason you'd have free licenses is if the only thing you're doing is building reports for yourself and publishing that to your My Workspace. With that free license, you still have the capability of publishing to the web. Anytime you have public data or public reports that can go out there, can still use that free license to make that happen. I'm often doing career coaching for people in our user group community and beyond. And a lot of times, for those that are looking to get into a role as an analyst or an engineer, or with Power BI specifically, I mentioned, hey, build your own portfolio. You can use public data. You can use Power BI Desktop and a free license, and you can publish it to the web. And that you can even publish those reports to the Microsoft data stories or the data gallery, and build up a portfolio without spending a penny, and do it all on public data. So those are some of the reasons and use cases for the free account. Any questions on the free account? Okay. And anybody feel free to pause me as we go through this. Next is talking about that sharing and collaboration, why you would really need a pro license, and that is to publish and consume reports in PowerBI.com. PowerBI.com is what we typically refer to as Power BI service. And when you think of, I am paying a $10 license to be able to go to PowerBI.com and not only just look at my workspace and look at the data and the reports that I've myself provisioned, I want to have an organization-wide experience where we can all collaborate, view reports, have ad hoc analysis to our data, and share and collaborate. That's what you're paying that $10 for. Now, that $10 also gives you data sets. It gives you a maximum amount of storage you can have across data sets and workspaces. There's a lot to like to that $10 license. Now, it's worth mentioning there are two alternatives of distribution models that people may or may not know about. One of those is being able to embed in SharePoint or embed in your software as a service product. Now, embedding in SharePoint, what's called this EM SKU, that EM SKU is only if you're using SharePoint as that distribution model and you don't want to use the Power BI service. That's really why you're paying for that other SKU. Then there's Power BI Embedded, where you can build your own application. You can not worry about Power BI service at all. And what you do is you access all your reporting through that custom application that you built on your own. It is worth mentioning, what about on-prem? We are an organization that's mostly on-prem, and we want Power BI, and we want to share reports with Power BI. Now, kind of an interesting way to purchase. You can't buy Power BI Report Server on its own. Funny enough, you have to buy a Power BI Premium to be able to get the report server, which is your gateway to the cloud. It's a pretty expensive to have it on-prem and never use the cloud because you're really paying for the cloud compute. But hey, if you want on-prem, that's the way to get it. Ty, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, my question was about embedding like a Power BI report, whether it's in SharePoint or my question is more about like sharing Power BI reports. So like I have a pro account and I want to share it with a bunch of folks who have like the free account. Um, if I have it in a Power BI workspace, will the people with the free accounts will they be able to like perpetually view the reports
No.
in
So
Power BI
if you have a free
online?
account, you can't go to a workspace outside of my workspace, right? Now, you can say, well, what we could do is buy like an embedding SKU, which is like a premium SKU that allows free licenses to see the report. Or you could buy Power BI Premium and have a premium workspace where free license users can see reports and um, you know different visuals.
Okay.
Those are the only scenarios that a free license will really work.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, assigned Power BI licenses. We talked about free licenses. We talked about Pro, and that's where you see this. I think this is a great image. The reason why that's half filled is because you can, use and collaborate Power BI in Teams, because you can put a Power BI report in Teams as well. But if they don't have a Pro license or if it's not premium capacity, they're not going to be able to see it. And so yes, Power BI Pro is pretty much, your one-stop shop for being able to develop as well as share and see other content. Okay, now there's also the Power BI Premium per user license. Now, Power BI Premium per user, yeah, it came out in 2021, and it seems like more and more organizations that I'm talking to are starting to lean more and more over to Power BI Premium per user. Reason being is the larger data set size is typically what they need. They have tons of data that they've been accumulating and reporting on, and their data set size has been getting larger and larger. And, you know, they've already went through trying to optimize and, cut out any of the data that's not completely necessary in that data set. And if they're still hitting what is the 1 GB limit in the Power BI Pro, that's typically the decision point of Power BI Premium per user. There's also a bunch of other capabilities that there's a gap between Pro and Premium. Things like AutoML, deployment pipelines. Those are the two biggest reasons I've seen why an organization would jump from Pro to Premium. So Well, those three reasons. It's an extra $10. So rather than $10 per user, it's $20 per user. But when you think of what you're getting, and I will just show this here. This is a great bird's eye view on the licenses. When you make this jump from Pro to Premium per user, even just a premium capacity, having 100 GB for each data set, or what is now called a semantic model, that's pretty impressive. And then having maximum storage across Power BI of 100 terabytes. You can literally have Power BI be your end all be all with the premium um, per user license and have enterprise warehouse capabilities right there in those semantic models versus the pro. And by enterprise grade, I mean enterprise size. You get enterprise grade throughout all of what Power BI does. But when you think of some of these use cases where you have like large centralized models, it's going to necessitate Power BI Premium per user or capacity. Any questions there? All right, we'll keep on chugging. Okay, now, of course, only a few days ago, Microsoft mentioned that they are doing away with P SKUs. What does that mean? Why do we care about P SKUs? So Power BI P SKUs are how you buy Power BI Premium, the capacity based. So if we go back, that is this column right here. When you buy that capacity base, even larger model size limits, same refresh rate, same, maximum storage across Power BI. But this one dot here, one lake storage, one lake cache, what does that mean? When you have Power BI Premium or any of those P1 SKUs, you basically had all of Fabric. They were synonymous. The Power BI Premium per user SKU became just a purchasing method where if you wanted a yearly commitment and you wanted a cheaper price on all of your Power BI Premium capacity, that was the way to go. And I know many organizations that have gone that route because they are completely all in on having Power BI not only be their visualization layer, but their complete data layer and their semantic layer. So these P SKUs are going to go away, but they're just going to be replaced by the same F SKUs we know from Fabric. You'll also see this P1 SKU where it starts at that $4.995 a month. That was kind of the minimum price point or the price per year. This monthly is going away because they've been replaced by the F SKUs. This yearly price is going to be very close to what you could buy a Fabric SKU for and just get all of Fabric. It almost is like what I was mentioning with Report Server. If you want to buy something on-prem, Microsoft makes you buy this whole cloud solution. How does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because they want to pull you into the cloud, right? Same thing with Fabric. You want all the things, all the greatest things about Power BI, well, you're going to get Fabric with it as you buy these larger capacities. And honestly, it's a great thing, I think, for customers. These other SKUs above, the EM SKUs, that's the embedding SKU I had mentioned, things like SharePoint or Teams. And then the A SKU is Power BI embedded. We're not going to get too far into either of those unless somebody on this call would like me to. I'll just open it up there if there's anybody, super interested in any of these capacities.
So I have a question. So instead of having like a per user, you're just getting like a capacity, and it's unlimited users.
Yes, for viewing. You're buying a capacity of viewing, and that capacity is based on certain vCores and RAM. So it's dependent on how well your report is built, how snappy that model is and how much data is running through it. But if if this capacity can run that report all well and have the concurrent users, doing the slicing and dicing with the report, then yeah, you're completely fine, and you can get it for much cheaper.
Gotcha. And so obviously like the price goes up a lot between, a couple users. Like if you're starting to get Power BI, implementing Power BI, I'm assuming like I don't know the rest of everything about it. I've been learning more about Fabric, right? Is it include the data warehouse? Is that, or can you get into more detail on like what Fabric includes, or will you do that later on in the
Yes.
presentation?
Yeah, we will get into the Fabric part.
Okay.
But yeah,
Thanks.
when I was mentioning when you get Power BI Premium, that capacity, and it comes with all of Fabric, it truly comes with all of Fabric. And you have, just like I was saying, like, hey, as long as you've got the capacity, the cores and storage, everything's just going to work, right? It's either working faster or slower based on, the size of F SKU or P SKU you have. But yeah, we'll get more into what's all included in Fabric and how our Power BI world is slowly transitioning to being very much more Fabric oriented than just Power BI oriented. Okay, so now that we know P SKUs and EM and A SKUs, I'm going to skip over some of this embedding. This was the major call out that we just mentioned. P SKUs are analogous to F SKUs. A P1 is equal to F64, and that's exactly why P SKUs are going away. They're just going to have F SKUs, and you're going to have the ability to purchase those F SKUs for a cheaper yearly price, and you just get everything. So now it's an all or nothing purchase. When you're thinking of the capacities, you're going to get Power BI and everything more. You can choose what you want to do with all that capacity you just purchased. So, and that's where you see this translation here. Just make it big for a second. Anything below this F64 capacity, that's where viewers of reports are no longer free, and you're really just purchasing the Fabric back end. And you can separate those things, right? Like, hey, I can have my Fabric back end, and let's say I don't need somebody to build reports. You can have somebody without a Power BI Pro license in Fabric building stuff. But as soon as you want them to publish reports and content, that's when you'll need a pro license. So organizations that have engineers and scientists that are never going to make data visualizations, no worries. Just use the F SKUs and license your analysts and visualization experts with Power BI Pro to build the reports. That's assuming engineers and scientists will never have to see those end reports unless they're on a call or doing share screen, but you have that option. Okay, let's keep going. Some of the high-level notes on Power BI Premium. Again, I had mentioned like what are those buying options aside from just larger data sets and more storage? Why would I go premium, whether it's premium per user or Power BI Premium? You're thinking of things like incremental refresh, being able to partition that data set and incrementally refresh only bits and pieces of it. Paginated reports, you only get that through premium. If you're an organization that loves, like long paginated, like PDF looking reports, that's and using paginated report builder, that's for you. I've already mentioned unlimited sharing. Another important distinction is with premium, you can do object level security, not just row level security. Object level security gives you an easier way of, hey, this person can't see this table versus just this row in a table, and just block that off. And so it makes maintaining your security model and your data model a lot easier when you have sensitive data that you're reporting on, typically HR data, patient data. Deployment pipelines, I already mentioned that. Premium data flows. Data flows are a fantastic piece of the toolkit where you can create Power Query flows and components of data sets that can then be brought, or semantic models that can then be brought together. Sorry that I keep referring to data sets and semantic models and using that interchangeably. Again, these are terms that had been changed only in the past few months. So as long as you know a data set is a semantic model and vice versa, great. Okay, so that's for premium. All right, now we get to the Fabric part. And then I'm probably going to just pause and give everybody else some opportunity to talk, maybe even talk through how their organization, if you guys want to mention how you are purchasing and distributing or using your licensing, that might be helpful for others. But okay, so how does Fabric licensing differ from Power BI? Fabric is specifically the back end, right? It is the warehouse, the lakehouse, activator, real-time analytics with Kusto, all of these capabilities. And the Power BI Pro is just this little box, that visualization, that sharing of reports. Now, what we're going to see as P SKUs go away is if you buy those Fabric SKUs, those larger capacities, F64 and above, and you purchase them, whether it's a yearly commit, pay as you go, or a monthly, you can get all the Power BI premium features that you want and the ability for viewers to see reports. So it's like a mix and a match. It's a crazy little matrix, but as long as you understand all those components that I just spent the last 30 minutes walking us through, it'll be much easier for you to understand the craziness of what's going on here when we talk about licensing and features. Couple things to mention with Fabric, you can pause and resume. That's kind of nice, right? I know an organization, I was actually baffled to hear it, but they turn on Fabric and reports are only available between certain hours of time. And outside of that, you can't see reports. And that is a cheap way of getting exactly what you need and getting it to the people that need it, and making sure they look at it. And sometimes just knowing that you don't have access to something, it kind of pushes you to want to look at it. So they saw a little more adoption for the reports, funny enough. But yeah, having that ability, if you don't want to pay for a yearly commit, you can just do pay as you go with Fabric and just turn it on and off as you like and get the right level of Fabric as you want. Now, currently you can't automate that. You have to manually go in and pause it and resume. I do that in our tenant, and it's definitely, a handful of clicks. Is it annoying? Yes, but does it save you money? Yes. I think the rest of this is just a lot more in the weeds. I will quickly jump through here on the Fabric page. You'll see the Fabric pricing. It's all based on those FSKUs I had mentioned, and they have the pay as you go. You see here, reservation not applicable. That's going to change when those PSKUs go away. They also have some storage costs here, pretty cheap and pretty, negligible in the grand scheme of things. But it is something to mention. On certain levels of Fabric, you have to also buy the storage alongside what you're doing. Okay, I think this is where I pause. I kind of went through this, hopefully not too quick. Any questions or feedback from the audience? Michael, I'm guessing that answered your question.
It did, thanks.
Awesome. Now, funny enough, if I go here, look at how similar these numbers are. And I just saw this used to say Power BI, now it says Microsoft Fabric. P1 SKU 4995. Or hey, you want to buy this, here's per month. You want to get on like a yearly commitment. It's pretty close to that. So that's why those things aren't merging. And you definitely pay a premium for pay as you go. But at least you can start, stop, and do whatever you like. Yes, Ty.
What is the general suggested use case if you're like at a smaller business, um, for having a premium license?
Like the premium per user.
Yeah.
So let's go back. Some of the main reasons are some of those premium capabilities I had mentioned earlier. Like, hey, let's say we have tons of reports and we're kind of stepping over ourselves as we're publishing them. Deployment pipelines is a big help where you can actually look as you're publishing from dev test to prod. It does checks for you automatically of, okay, like, is this a different report? Is it not? And we actually have a methodology, a DevOps methodology for publishing. Currently, Power BI and Power BI Pro, you don't really get that, right? You just got whoever's developing it needs to know, oh yeah, I'm going to write over this data set and report. And that's just the tribal knowledge of what it is. Hey, we could use OneDrive. Using OneDrive, that can be where you have like dev test prod and where you have your source code of your PBIX. But it's just, one extra thing to manage, right? Versus being directly done through the Power BI service. I'm hoping more of that DevOps gets better and better. People have been clamoring for it, asking for it for a long time. And we see it happening, but guess what? You have to pay the premium. Now, the other reasons I mentioned was the model sizes is, if you're using Power BI and you have these mega import mode models because you don't really have a data warehouse and you've just done everything and slapped it together in Power BI, rather than going and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars building out the data warehouse infrastructure, Let's just spend $10 more per user and get the larger model size limit, is what I've seen some organizations do. Others have said, well, this doesn't make sense. Hey, we built up a certain critical mass now of reporting and people using reports and wanting insights. This makes a good reason to say, hey, we should start building out a more enterprise level backend architecture with governance and metadata and administration. That's where you'll either make the decision to go the Power BI premium per user route and do more things in those Power BI data sets and semantic models, or you purchase Fabric, and Fabric can be that backend, and you can have Fabric feed those semantic models. So again, way too many options, right? But those way too many options, I think sometimes are a good thing, as certain customers only want specific things and they have specific ways how they got to where they are in their implementation and their data maturity. And so you have ways of kind of faking it till you make it, of I think being truly data mature and just slapping an extra $10 license and making it happen. Or hey, we are wanting to lean into Fabric. We are wanting to, you know, manage, build, and maintain a whole data estate. Because what's nice in Fabric, you've got things like data lineage. You have the ability to, build pipelines, write notebooks, you know, all the greatness of Delta format with your data, being able to time travel with your data. That's one of the main capabilities I see customers really loving. But yeah, that's kind of the dichotomy there.
Thank you.
Any
Greg,
other
can you talk a
questions?
little bit about licensing when you go kind of outside of your firm? So we put together a bunch of dashboards and reports, and we want to share with a limited subset of external parties. What licensing kind of scheme would you implement?
There are multiple options, and we're going to walk through them. That really gets me excited because Fabric has really changed the game around that. So what are the options overall? You've got the option of embedding. Hey, we can build our own, let's say, our own application. Or, I hate to make a plug, but we had built an accelerator solution for Power BI embedded. Like, hey, here's a template you can deploy, and you've got an application. Now all you have to do is publish to a Power BI workspace, link that Power BI workspace to this new to the embedded custom app. You buy the A SKU and a couple other SKUs like an Azure database and a web service, and you're good to go. Now, there's what I've seen too in the past few months. Now there are more vendors out there where you can go and purchase like software as a solution, Power BI embedded SKUs, and have a customizable embedded environment that you can share with your end users outside of the organization. And the cheapest you'll pay, where is that? Should be prepared to pay this around $800 a month, because you've got those other services to think of as well. But that's, where does that make sense? Well, if you've got $10 licenses, or and you've got what, like 80 people, that's around 800, right? If you are sharing outside of that, the 80 to like even 200 person range, embedded could make sense for you. Now, Fabric also is an option in some ways. In Fabric, you can have people, you can invite others into your workspace to work on the data, but to build reports and view reports, unless you've got the F64 and above, is that really a viable solution? Now, the B2B Connect is you can do Azure B2B, where if anything under F64, or let's say you don't even have an FSKU at all, as long as your partner, customer, or whoever, as long as they've purchased a Power BI license and provisioned it in their tenant, and you share a report to them, this is what it's going to look like. you're going to get this little thing here from external orgs. And you'll see the workspaces and the reports that I have access to. And because I have a pro license, I can go view those reports from our amazing partner, Power On. So yeah, so either you're doing embedded, you are working in a B2B like connection style path, or what I've seen that's super painful that some organizations do is they literally create users and their tenants for their partners and assign a license and invite them to and give them credentials that they need to log in with. Managing that is a nightmare. Please do not do that. I know it sounds cheaper and on the surface level easier. It really is not. Either you're going to have the end person buy a pro license, or you're going to buy an F64 and above capacity that you can invite them to, which is really cool, by the way. In Fabric, you have this idea of domains where you can change. Where's domains? I think in the workspaces. Let's go to my demo. Is it one like data hub? Yes. See how you can like set up these domains? You can set up like little shells where you can have like a customer or a partner. They can have it's almost like a larger version of the workspace. And that domain can have all these other assets like Fabric assets and Power BI assets. And it's segregated from your own, more internal assets. You can segregate that way or by workspace. Does that help at all? Do you want to talk maybe more specifically about your current situation on any of those options that kind of seem like a better fit?
Yeah, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the easiest solution sounds like the external organization to have their own Power BI Pro and then share it with them. Otherwise, you're paying, $800 plus a month for either the embedded or I don't even know what Azure BTB means, but whatever
I
that.
will show you. There is some good documentation. Here it is. This is exactly what you want. And it's actually super easy to do. Putting it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Entra is what has been renamed by Active Directory. Again, it's been dizzying all these name changes in the past like 6 months. So I'm really trying to keep on my toes. But what is Active Directory? What is Entra? It's your identity provider within the whole Microsoft ecosystem. That identity is where they're slapping on those licenses and your access, right? And so when you are making this connection between organizations, a good example is I'm in Teams and I want to bring in our customers so we can collaborate on some documentation, or they can share, some documents that we need for like scoping and engagement. I create a Teams and I invite their email address to that Teams. And what that's doing in the background is creating a guest account in our Entra or in our Active Directory saying, hey, this guest has access to this team. We're inviting them. And there is a brokered connection between the identity services from my organization to theirs. And I see Tim asking if there's user limitations, not that I know of. I mean, there are limitations to how many users you can have in your Active Directory, which will be a limiter, right? Like, I don't know what that limit is. I've never seen a customer hit it, but I'm sure you can purchase more Entra to allow that to happen.
I was just kind of giving a nod to previous documentation for some of the limitations when you're doing guest accounts, where if you want to export to Excel or something like that, there was some limitations behind that. There's some things that people were complaining about. Yeah, considerations and limitations. There you go.
Okay, labels, we know that. You can see the data sets, if you have contributor access, which is awesome, which means you can do like analyze in Excel.
Well, it says
Well,
guess
sorry,
you.
it can't. Sorry. You can't do analyze in
Yeah.
Excel. Okay, that's why people get super pissed off, huh?
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I got beat up over recently, so I thought I might call that out.
Mm-hmm. Wonder if they're working on that. Can't be at mentioned. That makes sense.
As a matter
Direct
of fact,
publishing, that makes sense.
there was a couple situations where I actually just gave up and said, give me a 365 account so that I can work on your environment so I don't stumble on things that I'm limited by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you are, well, the other option though is Fabric.
Okay.
So in Fabric, or for my presentation at Fabric Conference next week, I had a partner, and I'll actually show this. Okay, so if I go here, I go to this workspace. Here's our Fabric Conference, our Fabric workspace. I was able to invite him, and he was able to build a notebook on our own lakehouse and build a pipeline pulling data from Azure Databricks to Astra DB, just because I gave him that B2B connection into Fabric. And he could do everything, like now he also needed a Power BI report to mess with any of the Power BI assets in this workspace. But everything else, from data engineering to the data science to the data activator, he was all good.
Okay.
And so maybe ask them, hey, why don't you purchase an FSKU, invite me, and you can work on the data as you need.
That's good to know. Thank you.
A pleasure. Yeah, and that's what I was mentioning, where Fabric is really opening up this external and organizational like cross collaboration. That was one of the most exciting things I saw, and I will be mentioning this at the conference. That how cool is it that two people from two totally different organizations can do engineering, analysis, and data science on the same copy of data, and still um, respect all the data privacy, data security within the tenant and within our two like tenants connected. Now we do have some. I know for us, like I have sometimes customers that we add to our B2B, and sometimes get blocked because we have higher, well, a higher bar for security risk reviews, and some IT, you can kind of set that bar. And when they come into our environment, all of a sudden their security bar is raised, and they'll get blocked unless they go remediate some at-risk things that they were tagged in their identity. So in Entra, if that makes sense. So it's a pretty sweet thing to say, and this is just out of the box. I didn't have to do anything special. And I believe this is also only like F2 or something. Let's say, oh, this is just my trial. So I'm still on the trial, but it works. So it's been stuck on this 59 days left of trial, and I hope it doesn't get unstuck. But everybody use your trial, and I would say, Tim, hey, just have them spin up the trial and see what you can and can't do, right? Make sure you get your contributor role. He needed a contributor role. Somebody in our organization, I had him go viewer role to see what he can see differently. He was able to get in, but he couldn't get into the data. Yeah, the never-ending trial. I mean, that was Power Virtual Agents, right? It was a never-ending trial for like years. Now all of a sudden, Gen AI and changed all that, and Copilot Studio. But Microsoft definitely wants people to kick the tires on this thing.
Yeah, I heard that premium capacity is now being retired. Like you can't even purchase it.
Right, the P SKUs are retiring, but remember the name P SKU is really all that's going away. When you buy those Fabric SKUs, they were the same thing as the P SKUs. Where was it? Yeah. These things were the same exact thing you got, except P SKUs you could buy with a yearly commitment. F SKUs you could pay as you go, or have a monthly commitment. Now P SKUs are going away because now you can just do the same thing with F SKUs, and now we don't have to worry about a whole new letter. It's just F SKU everything. And the one view that I saw that makes the most sense was here. Is that making sense for you, Tim?
Yeah.
All right, any questions to stump me? Give me your worst. Or just tell me how great I am and how great of friends we are for being part of this community.
We're great friends, Greg. You're doing an awesome job. We would love to see him stumped, though, if you guys have any questions.
I got one.
Yes.
Greg, how do you typically structure a discussion with the potential client of a medium size, I would say, who, let's just say it's an Excel shop and they're looking to just explore Power BI, but not overpay, right? And, an army of analysts typically, right? Some of them have like some Power BI experience. Most of them don't. They're just Excel jockeys, right? Do you have like a kind of a gradual strategy of starting with the pro and then seeing how it goes?
So when I was doing my modern Excel analyst in a day trainings, it was really annoying because if people didn't have like Power BI Pro access, they couldn't get to the workspace, and I couldn't show them like cool stuff to analyze in Excel.
Right.
You don't need to have a license to do analyze in Excel in Excel anymore, or to like connect to the data sets, right? And so really the only people you're licensing are the ones that are going to be building those models, right? And so that's there's analysts, and then I think there's like super analysts, right?
Right.
Those that are wanting to dive into wanting to do some of that modeling and that curation. So making sure they are licensing the appropriate amount of people that have the skills to actually use that $10, right? Because hey, medium-sized businesses, I get it, right? Every penny counts. That additional pro license could mean the world to them, right? And so what is the criteria? Typically we actually sometimes we'll write out the criteria, like, hey, this person, now they are going to, for them to get pro, for them to get this, it's less so they get access, all of a sudden they have responsibility. That's really the difference maker of like, okay, now you have this responsibility. But at least our Excel people, our Excel guns, can work with what you build and see their data.
Yeah, I mean that comes with like having to teach him analyze in Excel, but it's pretty much the same as just the pivot tables, right? You just work with the data set or semantic model.
Yep. You can
And
also
the
have
rest is
light
just Excel
tables.
skill.
It's the pivot
Yeah,
tables.
yeah,
You can always have
exactly.
those light tables. They just can't they can't drill in, right? It has to be like built in Excel.
And what's nice about that is that analyze in Excel respects all the security you build into a Power BI semantic model, and nobody's downloading anything and laying hands on some data they're not supposed to see.
Yeah, and sometimes I do mention like the information protection and like those security labels, right? Is, hey, if you're going to be doing Excel and you're trying to save money here, don't be so cheap that you don't think about the extra security layer. If, hey, they're going to be connecting to Excel with like HR data, make sure you have that high sensitivity label so nobody's going to export that data and doing something malicious.
Thank you.
I know it's a tough place to be in sometimes in the middle as organizations are growing. So just buy an F2 SKU. It solves all your problems, right? Is what we hear. Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Stop sharing.
Greg, do you have time for some Q&A that does not relate to licensing?
Sure, why not?
Okay. I actually have two, and I hope these are pretty simple.
Okay.
The first is in many of my visuals, I use multiple years of data, usually 5 years at a time. And I'm showing each year using a different color. Each time I update those visuals, the colors change. And in many of my files, I'll have upwards of, say, 30 pages, and there can be as many as 4 graphs or more on a page. So when those colors change, I have to go through it and make changes as well.
Except if you use a theme in Power BI. You could use themes in Power BI, so then you have consistent colorings of those visuals, and it's always like now, I can't tell you specifically, they'll always get like, hey, like one report page, it's these 5 colors, and it goes to this certain data point, right? Like, hey, customer A versus is green and customer B is blue. When I go on to the next report page, it might be vice versa. But at least with the theme, you don't have to go through the pain of like picking through all the palette. You can just see, okay, who's wrong, and get them all to be the right colors that's consistent across the report tabs. Have you looked into themes before?
No, I'm not at all familiar with it. Now, I should say I'm using Power BI Desktop. Does this make any difference?
No, themes are part of desktop.
Okay, all right.
And you can
Okay, I
customize your
will check
theme.
that out.
You can customize your theme. You can save your theme. It's just like PowerPoint.
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate that. I will check that out. My second question is there or what is the limit to the number of pages one can have in a Power BI file?
Yeah, PBIX, that's a great question. I can just look it up. Has anybody ever hit limitations on this call to save me a Google? Or I mean a Bing, sorry. And you mean the tabs, right?
Correct, yeah.
Are your reports really getting that big?
Well, right now I'm pushing 30 pages on some,
Wow.
and I can see that going up probably by 10 shortly.
Tab sheet. The Power BI desktop limitations. We're getting some questions for you. Go ahead and ask Brian. I'll look this up.
Yeah, the answer is no. It does not take long to refresh that many pages.
That makes sense because really, you guys think of it, the visual layer is pretty performant, right? It's the semantic model that could be what's holding it back, or if you're in like direct query mode.
Greg, maybe it's not page limitation. Maybe it's the size of the file. Maybe that's it. Maybe it can be as big as it can be.
Yeah, have as many tabs.
Right.
Yeah, and you're also limited by, because you're doing on desktop, it's, what you've got that won't like shut down your laptop, right? How much memory, I've had people say, oh, this Power BI, this PBIX file, I can't even open it on my laptop. It's so big and thorny. And I can only edit it now in the service, unless I'm using, like a VM with way more memory and all that.
Brian, how many, so you're saying, how many pages do you need in that report?
I doubt 30 to 50 is going to really hit anything. But he was saying he has 30 pages, right?
Is this all the same kind of domain, or is it like, well, I mean, like problem domain? Because
I apologize, everybody. Suddenly my connection just completely disappeared. So
as we're all asking you questions.
Yeah. How many pages do you need, Brian, in that report?
Well, right now I think I'm going to say I probably am up to like maybe 28. and I
Okay.
can probably am going to increase that by another 10 shortly. You know, what's the
Second
maximum I might ultimately need? You know, it all depends on what project I'm working on. But so
second
right
question
now, I
is,
can say, you know, 30 to 40 is probably
yeah.
the max I would need for what I'm currently working on.
The second
I
question is this report all for the same audience?
Yes,
It is.
yes.
so
Is
I know for a fact, you know, Brian Grant, he has built Power BI desktop solutions with over 100 tabs.
Okay.
Course, and it's not 100 tabs because it's 100 pages of report, but what we have in our like trainings, in our Power BI fundamentals training, is you go from tab to tab and it's literally building the solution step by step. So if you like screw something up, you can just go to the page before. It's got tons of those tabs, and again, there's been no limitation on the size of that PBIX based on the tab. It's just the limitation of size of the data and, you know, the ability to run that PBIX on your machine.
Okay.
Also, two more layers I'd like to dig into this, right? The one is, you know, Greg mentioned the size of the file, right? That is if you don't segregate the semantic model from the report, because you can point, you know, from a report to a semantic model, which is, you know, in a different file, right? Like one PBX. So that's the best practice actually. When you publish it to the Power BI service, and you strip it, you know, you basically split all the report pages right from the data set. So one PBX contains the data set that's published, and then the other, you know, file or several files could just contain the, and I can paste the link in how to do it. So they just point to it, and it's in live connection, right? Those files are super small in size, you know, if the size is a limitation, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you're up to 30 pages, and if it is for the same audience, trying to think of how to segregate it from like a focused area perspective, right? Let's just say, yeah, there is a CEO, and he needs to see everything from a high level to the low level. But still, if there's a sales oriented, right, report, that could be a separate report, separate file. If there's a HR oriented, that could be a separate file, right? So that, just trying to think about the usability, like the Tim Henning mentioned, I think.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. You know, I believe that files should be designed for the target audience. And so you're absolutely right. I would not send a lengthy file to a CEO or an equivalent of that. Okay, it just wouldn't make any sense. That's not what they're interested in. Yeah.
Yep. And I mean, you also have this idea of using audiences within Power BI, where when you publish the app, right? Like, hey, I've got these 30 pages. I've got a finance audience that only sees these pages. I've got the CEO audience that only sees these pages. That's also a way to approach it. So then that way, you know, if there's so many pages, you know, like you don't have to stumble over it. But for a one-man team building the data solution, you've only got like one PBIX you have to worry about, right?
Mhm.
That is the
Oh,
nice thing, right?
Yeah.
Everything's got benefits and drawbacks. So yeah, well, I've got a 30-page report, but I only have to deal with one semantic model and one report, right? So what
the
is,
problem is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. No,
Finish it.
you go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the problem is that Power BI desktop is kind of unforgiving, right? It doesn't have like a good scroll bar, so you have to click, and you can't like drag over the one
yeah.
page until you have to
It's
like
so
drag
annoying.
across its screen. They just, I mean, my advice to them is like hire a UX expert from Apple, steal it from Apple or something, right? You've done a good engineering job, but man, it could really use some polish. They've come a long way there for sure, but
Yeah.
you know, that's
Well,
the other thing. When you have a lot of pages and they're also named, you know, something very descriptive, it's a pain just getting to the next page, right?
right.
Brian,
Fortunately, right now, my target audience, or I should say the customers that I work with, are all nonprofits, and they tend to be rather forgiving in what it is that they're willing to accept. Okay, and so therefore, I have, you might say, the luxury of being able to do some things that would not work in a corporate, particularly large corporate environment.
Mhm.
Okay. So I can afford, you know, and I don't mind doing the extra work, but I can create separate files for, you know, specific audiences in that regard. And if that means I have to create several, that's fine. I can do that. So
Are
I'm
you
just thankful for having a tool like Power BI to let me do what I do. I use it primarily for publishing or displaying results, I should say. Okay. So it works well in that regard. A few bugs I'm having to learn to work with, but every program has those.
Yeah. Tim, you were
Right.
going to say something?
Yeah, I was just curious. Are the reports pretty much the same, but perhaps maybe a different filter context per the user audience? I mean, 30 pages, like that's a lot of unique page reports. I mean, for one report, I was just curious.
Well, I guess in what I do, I should maybe say this to help add some context to it. When I send these reports out, I also do an analysis of the data. And that's in a separate document. And I will make reference in that written document, which it's a Word document. It's basically a series of bullet points that talks about certain aspects of the data that's been analyzed. And I will make reference to the document that contains the visuals, which is in PDF format. I'll just simply say, see page 2 in the graph file. Okay. And so as you go through there, I might make reference to page 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, whatever. So I might make reference to maybe 5, maybe 10 pages altogether in that 30-page file. And so depending on what those folks want to look at, that may be the only thing they're interested in. But I will send the entire file with them in case they have additional questions.
Makes sense. One thing I do want to show you before we get too deep into like yet another question. This is where in Power BI Desktop, when I go to View, this is where you find the theme. You can browse for themes, theme gallery, customize your current theme, and save it. I love that we're all. I mean, again, this is a great forum, I think, for everybody to like get to help each other and bounce ideas. That is the whole point of this user group. So, Brian, thank you for having the courage to ask and to get into it. Honestly, so I'm glad this could be an outlet.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, you folks are a lifesaver.
Hey, and you're doing Good Samaritan work working with nonprofits. I really wanted to mention, I don't know if you know this or if the nonprofits know this, but nonprofits have steep Microsoft discounts from their enterprise M365 to Power BI and Fabric. It is like, I think they slash almost 70% of the price. So Brian, as you think about if they need to improve their data maturity, even get premium per user, any of these other capabilities, it's pretty cost effective for a nonprofit. And if you have any questions around how to get that nonprofit licensing, happy to chat.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. Yes, Power BI Tips has awesome themes. That's a great call out, Wilson. They are like the theme guys for sure. Okay, well, it's kind of awkward for me to say, can everybody give me a round of applause? So how about we give you a round of applause?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I was just going to mention one quick thing. Brian, by the way, if if you have any, we pasted some links for you in the chat, so feel free to be sure to check that out. But yeah, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Be happy to give you some tips as well.
Everybody in this community is down to help, especially when you throw the nonprofit word out there. Hey, everybody, have a fantastic evening. Stay tuned for all the cool stuff that's going to come out next week at Fabric Conference. Hopefully, I don't epically screw up my presentation, and you'll know if we host next month's user groups, if I'm still alive. But jokes aside, thank you everybody for being here, taking the time together. Really appreciate you guys for supporting this community, and hopefully you learned something new today.